point of contention between atheists and religious people, is that religious people can be a little bit strange.
Atheists are never strange by comparison. Checkmate, theist. Oh wait, that's not a good argument.
Their actions can be a little bit on the unaccountable side because it's I guess it's difficult for a deeply religious person to tell the difference between a religious command, a command from God, and just pure insanity.
If you hear voices in your head, or even one voice, it's you. And to think that it might be God is something that the system is inherently flawed in doing to that person. They are telling the person that they could hear God in their head. But that's a problem because if you hear a voice in your head that's not you, it's a different personality, and that's a sign of a mental issue, not a religious symptom. There have been people that have killed their own kids believing that that's what God wanted them to do or God told them to do it. Of course, some people blame Satan and demons on this as well. So if these entities really exist, then how do we possibly hope to differentiate between mental illness and the supernatural entity? What possible hope do we have to test it, especially given that apparently we can't test angels or God or demons or devils? So we should assume that it's a mental illness. So if you hear a voice in your head, you shouldn't assume that it's God at all. You should assume it's you, your own brain. And that if it's telling you to do things that you don't want to do, then you should probably, talk to somebody about that, like a mental health professional. So this is a flaw inherent in the system within theology, that it tells people you can hear the voice of God. And, but they didn't explain what that meant. It was too ambiguous. What it really means is this. What it really means is that. Well, I've had people tell them that God told them to do X, Y, and Z, or that God told them to not do X, Y, and Z, or that God said this or that was going to happen. But it's not God, it's them. So why ever teach in any way, shape, or form that God can communicate with our brain? And even if God does communicate with our brain, if we can't tell the difference between that and a mental illness, that's a flaw that God built into the system and or allowed into the system. So that places the problem back on God for letting that be in the first place. Whoops.
And fair enough. I don't dispute the fact that it can happen, and it does happen. So that's one reason why I think atheists are wary of religious people, and I tend to agree with the atheists on this one.
Well, I don't know that I'm wary of theists just because of that, or that's even an issue that I think about that often. And really, I'm not weary or concerned about theists in that sense at all, generally speaking. What concerns me more is that people that believe in all sorts of whatever are using those beliefs to influence their political choices. So who they vote for and what policies they vote for. So, there's a pretty good sizable flat earth society, and, who knows how much political influence they have, but it is troubling that they could potentially, hypothetically, get some policy taken away or put into place based on the idea that the earth is flat. It's like, let's defund NASA because NASA's this secret evil organization, blah, blah, blah. And they recognize, well, if they say that nobody will listen to them. So they'll say other things about NASA, that will work politically speaking to get NASA defunded. But they're not using reason or logic to motivate the changes that they're trying to enact politically. And so you have the creationists and you have the people of faith that have in the past said no to, say, stem cell research, and pulled back programs on scientific studies because of religious issues, or said no to abortion things being funded by the government because of religious issues. Not because of some sort of logical argument, which they might have, but they haven't made that argument, at least that I know of. And so without that argument, it's just, well, their religion says that X is wrong, or they think that their religion says that X is wrong. And then they vote accordingly, not based on their own desires or their own ideas. And so I find that to be much more of a problem.
There's a lot of work that has to be done and a lot of internal regulation that has to happen in order for a religious person to maintain clarity and not fall back on things that he or she really doesn't understand, because not all religious people understand what God is and what they are and their relationship with God.
What is God? And secondly, after you answered whatever your answer might be, how do you know that that is God? What informed you that that thing that you just described was God? What makes something God? That's what theology essentially tries to answer. But it doesn't do it in the way that we answer other questions. It's very much a top-down sort of system, that this is what God is, or this is what God has revealed to me, the lowly scribe, that's telling you what God is. And in either case, well, how do I know that that person really is talking to anyone but themselves? I saw this miracle, and so I know that there's a God, and it's this particular God. Well, there's so many questions. How do you know it was a miracle? How do you know which God it is? And how do you even know there's a God in the first place? What is God? How does it work? Where is it located? What is it made out of? How long has it been a thing? But all of those questions, although important, are secondary to how do you even know that there is a thing, God, that is more than just whatever we define it to be, and is instead a actual entity that exists in reality somewhere. And rather than continually putting assumptions about God out there, as religions do, maybe whatever it is something we have to discover, and not, you have to do this spiritual journey to find God. No, that if God is out there, we will find it through investigation. The same sort of investigation that we use to discover anything and everything else. You might say, well, that's a materialistic sort of viewpoint. God isn't science. We wouldn't find God that way because that's not the sort of thing that God is. How do you know? What if it is? Who are you to say what God is? Based on your religion, based on what you think some holy text said, and based on your own subjective interpretation of that holy text. What if God's more than all of that? Or what if God is less? Or what if God is merely a construct that humans have developed over time? Now, I happen to have an opinion on that matter, and I have arguments for and against that I could go over. But the burden is upon the one that says that there is a God in reality. If you just believe there's a God, okay, you don't have a burden. There's no burden there. I believe God is this, that, the other thing. Okay, that's nice. I don't. We don't have any burden to bear. We don't have to do anything about that. We don't have to justify those beliefs or anything like that. They're mere beliefs. But when we say God is X, we've made a statement about reality, and then we have the burden to show that that's the way it is. So, what is God? How do you know what God is? And is this something that we can use to ferret out all other God concepts other than the particular one that you're talking about? And what would that system even look like? And what would be a system to decide what God was real, if not the more naturalistic, materialistic methods of science, for example? If God is out there somewhere, but yet all around us, some religions say, well, but why can't we detect it in any meaningful way? Why is the only way that seems to be that we can interact with God something that is almost, if not completely, identical to something that can go wrong in your brain, where your brain malfunctions and tricks you into thinking that there's another voice talking to you? As you said before, that's a problem that you acknowledge. If God is indistinguishable from mental defects, then maybe that's something we need to seriously consider and say, perhaps we should remove God from the picture so that we just say it's a mental defect. Now, I'm not saying that if you're religious you have a mental defect. No, not at all. I think that different brains work in different ways, and it would seem to follow that certain people have to believe in some sort of God concept. Although what that is may or may not be defined by other people or society at large. It might be decided by their own self or a combination thereof, who knows. But it might be that their brain requires them to do that. And then there might be people that are required to never do it. And then you have people somewhere in between. But that only makes sense. Well, I suppose you could try to make sense out of it in a theology way. But it makes more sense under evolution. If you're saying, well, God wants to have a relationship, as you mentioned, a relationship with God, which I don't even know is a thing in the first place. Well, it's unlike any other relationship I have with anyone else, where I say, hey, how you doing? And the person says something back. Unless they don't like me, then they're silent. And when somebody is silent, you don't usually stick around that person too long. Unless they're a mute, but even then they'll have some way to communicate with you. So, if God is utterly silent, no matter how much I beg it to not be silent, and not just speak into my head, because that could be mental illness, but speak out loud in my ear, and not just me, but everybody else around, and forget about everybody else that's around in that localized area. How about the entire world at the same time? But no God has ever done that. Why? And theology has different answers to that question, and they call it divine hiddenness, and they make a big deal of it. Oh, no, it makes perfect sense because of this. Well, I don't buy it. If I'm meant to have a relationship with this thing, it's certainly not doing anything that anybody else has ever done in any possible relationship that makes sense to call it even a relationship, because it's extremely and entirely one-sided. If God loves me, as I'm told by some religions, it hasn't shown me that. And telling me that God did this thing in the past for me doesn't prove anything either. But it all goes back to the question of what God is in the first place. Maybe God isn't a thing that can do anything for me anyways. So expecting it to do something for me is foolish.
The central religious text of most religions is contradictory, self-contradictory, incoherent, and many times it looks as if it's been written by a stark raving lunatic. That is, if you don't take the time to really read the text.
This is a logical fallacy called special pleading, What you're doing here is you're saying that if we read this particular text in a certain way, under certain circumstances, then we'll walk away concluding what you concluded about it. Sure, it looks like it's made by a madman, but if you read it really carefully, then you'll understand it. If you go in with an open mind, then you'll be able to see it. If you look at it with a spiritual heart, you'll get to that place. If you do this or you do that, if you turn the lights down just low enough and angle it 45 degrees, then you'll be able to see the message clearly. No. First of all, why should I treat this text any differently than any other text that's available to read? Why should I critique it or read it any other way than I do any other text? And if I'm going to analyze it, and or critically analyze it, or apply critical thinking to it, or a combination thereof, why should I treat it any more special than any other text just because somebody called it holy? Well, I don't even believe that there is such a thing called holy anyways. So I'm going to treat it the same way as I do any other text, and I'm going to criticize it for what it says, not what I think it says or what I believe it says, but what it says. Oh, but you can't do that. Yes, I can. Why would I criticize it in some other way? Well, because this person thinks that it's supposed to be seen that way. Great, then they can write their own version, and I'll analyze their version. But if they don't want to do that, or they won't do that, then all I have is, well, this person said that you were supposed to see it this way. And this person said you're supposed to see it this way. And this person that I'm responding to on YouTube said that if I don't read it in a certain way, then I won't see it for what it is. So if I don't walk away with the conclusion that you have, then I've done it wrong. I hope that you understand why this is a logical fallacy now. It is ridiculous to suggest that a person must read something in a certain way to see it in a different way than they do by just reading the thing and letting the thing say what it says. If it looks like a mad dog and it barks like a mad dog and it's slobbering like a mad dog, well, you're just not looking at it right. Maybe you should go pet the dog. Maybe not.
You see? Because just take, I'm not going to talk about the genealogies in the Christian Bible and you know, all those weird things that happened in the Old Testament with the most vengeful and monstrous God that you can ever imagine. I'm not even going to talk about that, but just the Ten Commandments. If you look carefully at the Ten Commandments, especially the last 4 or 5, it's a list of don't do's.
Well, which set of the Ten Commandments would you like me to look at? Because there's 2 of them, and they're really close together. So it's odd that you would mention the Ten Commandments without clarifying which set I'm supposed to be looking at. And you did say the last 4 of the Ten Commandments. Well, which last 4? Because they're different. Now, you might not think they're that different, but they are. 7, and this is the King James Version, so it's going to sound a bit weird. Thou shalt not commit adultery. 7, thou shalt not offer the blood sacrifice with leaven. 8, thou shalt not steal. 8, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover be left unto morning. 9, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. 9, the first of the first fruits of thy land shall bring unto the house of the Lord. 10, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Number 10, thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. So which 4 am I supposed to be looking at here? Now, remember, the second one replaced the first. So my idea, my hypothesis is that the second set of 10 commandments doesn't make any coherent relevance to our day and age. And so we kind of just, no, the first set, that's the one we're going to go with. Not the second one. We're going to ignore the second one. We're also going to ignore the other 613 laws that are commanded, because those don't count for some reason. Now, even if I was to go with the first set, don't commit adultery. Why not? Why? It says don't do it, but why not do it? What's the reason there? Can we have an explanation for why this is a inappropriate behavior? Don't steal, the next one. Even to feed myself if I'm starving? Or feed somebody else that's starving? What if I steal from a corrupt government and give it to the poor? Is stealing wrong in every case at all times? What is stealing? Is stealing what the law says it is, or is it something else? Because the government can, at least in the United States, under certain conditions, decide that your land and your house and everything else belongs to them now. Now, they have to do certain things to do that, but they can still do it, and some people make a big deal of it, and I don't know how big of a deal it is or not, but I'm just saying they can do it, and they have done it. Usually they pay you something for it, but, So are they stealing from you when they do that? Some people say yes. Some people say no. But if it's the law, and that's okay, because it's not stealing, because it's the law that says this is okay to do, then there's an easy way to get around this commandment by just changing the laws regarding what stealing is. So that's a problem. Now, don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, neighbor, I'll take the interpretation to mean everybody, not just the persons living next to you. Well, I like the idea of not lying, but should I not lie if it might save their life? If somebody bad is coming looking for them, and they look like, they're going to hurt them or something, is lying inappropriate then? Is that bearing false witness, or does that just mean bearing false witness is when I lie in such a way that it hurts my neighbor? Well, that needs to be more clear. And you don't have a limit on how many characters you can have. This isn't Twitter. Come on, God, you can do better than this. So, thou shalt not covet the house, the wife, the manservant, maidservant, ox, ass, or anything that's the neighbor's. Well, why did you have to specify, couldn't you just say don't covet what somebody else owns? And what does that mean to covet anyways? And why is that bad? Why can't I want what they have? Not specifically what they have, literally speaking what they have, but I want to have a nice house like they have. Why is that bad? Or is that not true coveting? What does this mean? And how does it apply? I don't know. But none of these 4 commandments are the actual 4 commandments. So I don't know why I shouldn't offer blood of my sacrifice with leaven. I don't even know what the bleep leaven is. And I don't offer blood sacrifices. So I guess I'm clear on that one. And then something about the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover left into mourning. Well, I don't even celebrate or recognize or whatever the bleep you do with Passover, so that one doesn't apply to me. The first of the first fruits of thy land shall bring into the house of the Lord thy God. Well, I don't have land, so I guess I'm exempt from this. And what does that mean? do you bring it in? What's the house of God? Like, where's that? Is that the church? But I thought the church was the people of God. So do I just bring the fruits into the church and be like, here, I brought my first fruits in. Yay, I did what the Bible told me to. Okay, I'm going to go home with my first fruits now and eat them because it didn't say to leave them there. And then I've never boiled a kid in its mother's milk, so I'm fine on that one. But I just really would like a clarification of which 10 commandments I'm supposed to be looking at. And if it sounds like I'm frustrated, it's because I'm a little bit frustrated that you would tell me to look at the 10 commandments without seeming to realize that there's 2 sets. Something that, a person that cares about this book should, I think, know.
Not a list of do's. So, don't kill, don't steal, don't cheat, don't covet, don't harm, or, any of those.
Oh my word, you don't even know them verbatim? Are you kidding me? You want me to take them seriously, and you don't even know the first set verbatim? No, why should I bother to take it seriously at all when you don't even seem to know it? Yeah, well, whatever that last one is. Come on! How am I, seriously? I've asked Christians this. Is the Bible the most important book in the world? And they'll usually answer yes. And then I say, okay, and I ask them a simple biblical trivia quiz, like, name all 12 disciples. Some can do it, but not many. Believe I don't know, but I don't care. It's not something I consider to be the most important book in the whole world. It's not treated like it's the most important book. But, well, maybe I'm just not reading it in the special, super, mega, awesome way that I'm supposed to be reading it. So, I'm just a clueless atheist anyway, so what do I know?
It's a very strange list, because if you're rich, you can go to a desert island and you can sip coconut milk and write loving postcards to your parents, because it does say in the 10 Commandments that you have to honor your parents. And you can live like that for the rest of your life, and you've done absolutely nothing. I don't think there is any Christian person who would say that that is a well-spent life. So, what's missing? Well, the other side of the story. If you think about the 10 Commandments as just one side of the story, or a very, very concise version of the rules of behavior, then you get a completely different picture. So if you manage not to kill, not to steal, not to covet, under any circumstance, whether or not you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, high in society or low, then you would have to also be hardworking and courageous and consistent and tough. All of those things.
Well, that's a very interesting idea. Where in the Bible does it say any of this? I'll wait until you find the verse. Oh, it's not. It's in there somewhere, maybe. But it's not in the 10 Commandments or in the 613 that follow. Pretty sure I'm right about that. Could be wrong. But, if you're not going to source where you got those ideas from, then I could simply call you a false prophet or false teacher. And now within Christianity, that really does matter. Because if somebody was a Christian and I've identified you as a false prophet, which you would be because you didn't source the Bible, and you just presented the idea as if it's true without sourcing the Bible at all, then they have to not believe in you because you're a false prophet. Now, I don't advocate for that sort of skepticism. I would advocate for the sort of skepticism that says we shouldn't believe your conclusions because your argument is so flawed. But, it's a different sort of skepticism. But either way, the person's still going to walk away being skeptical of your ideas. So on one hand, you say, well, the Bible says this, as if it matters what the Bible says, and also do these things on top of that. But did the Bible say that? I don't know. You didn't tell me where it says it, if it says it at all. So even if I agreed with your position, which I don't, I wouldn't agree with the second part. So, yeah, just be consistent. Otherwise, you're a false prophet. But that's okay. I don't care. That doesn't bother me.
So it's like the bright side of the moon and the dark side of the moon. And if you read the Bible like that, well, it starts to make sense. And I would say also that, all those horrible things that happen. For example, Abraham. Abraham is revered as a prophet and the father of all the Semitic tribes. And, did he really pimp out his wife to the Pharaoh? It's very difficult to take, and some Christians, many Christians, really don't want to go there. They really don't want to approach it. They have blinders on, and they're in denial, serious denial. But if you read the Bible as an account of how the Spirit began to slowly descend into people, culminating with Christ, who was the Son of God and who was not perfect. He was imperfect. He was tempted.
Whoa, that's a huge claim to make within Christianity. The idea that Jesus isn't perfect would negate his sacrifice. The whole point of Jesus' crucifixion is that he's the perfect sacrifice. So you just blew Christianity out of the water as a viable religion if what you said is correct. Which I'm all for. Yeah, great. Good job. Christianity no longer is valid. Christ wasn't perfect. Yay!
If you read it like that, then it's a little bit easier to understand and to really see what's going on and why. And so what I'm trying to say is that the second reason why atheists are wary of religious people is that they don't understand how to use the central texts of those religions. So, I guess this is also the fault of the religious people, because from my experience, I'm just going to use the example of Christians because that's the example that I know best. Many Christians that I know, they kind of use the Bible like a cookbook. You have a recipe there and you apply it, and if the food doesn't taste good, then the cookbook is bad, and they just they get desperate and they become atheists.
So in this analogy, the cookbook is being used wrong, where the cookbook equals the Bible, and then they become desperate because the result wasn't what they were expecting, desired, or wanted, and tastes bad, although that wouldn't translate well to the Bible unless you're eating the Bible, which is in Revelation. The angel did eat the little book. No, sorry, he gave it to the man to eat the little book. Whatever. Anyways, what was I saying? I don't know. The Bible tastes yummy, therefore people become atheists. Wait, what?
So, well, the Bible is not a cookbook.
It's a cookbook!
But you can sort of approach it as if it were a cookbook.
So you said a couple of things that I have to address, and really have to fast forward through this part where you're talking about the Bible as a cookbook, because I just want to make memes like crazy. And one of the things you said, that if you use it the wrong way, that's maybe why people become atheists. So it's their fault? Or is it the person that wrote it's fault? Or is it the person that inspired the person that wrote it fault? Who do we lay the blame at? And typically, theists and apologists will lay the blame on the person rather than the author of the book, which is not a cookbook, but can be seen as that according to you. But why should I view your way of looking at this text as being correct? How do I know your way is right and everybody else's way is wrong? Now, you didn't say that your way is right, but there's a certain implication that if we look at it in this certain way, then we'll walk away with this understanding that you seem to have. But that's not necessarily the case. Even if I look at it as a cookbook, whatever this metaphor is supposed to be at this point, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll walk away with the same conclusion as you, which allows you to continually perform the fallacy which you have already performed of special pleading, that I need to look at it in this certain way. Why? Demonstrate that your way of looking at this is correct first, then we'll talk about how we should look at this.
People get really frustrated by the behavior of some religious people, and also by the sacred texts. And that's understandable. People don't necessarily have the time or the talent to put into really understanding what those texts mean.
And here we go again with more special pleading and mind reading. So mind reading because you're implying that you know what people are thinking, because you said that they are performing something or not performing something to a certain level. So they're not having enough time to do this reading of this text in a certain way. They don't have the skill set, they don't have the talent. And then you're using special pleading to suggest that you have to have a special talent or enough time to be able to understand any given text. Well, how would that be applied to the real world, where we have multiple different denominations within almost every religion you can think of, and non-religions as well that have weird beliefs within them? How would you meta-analyze different pastors to determine whether or not they're qualified to analyze the holy text? Maybe I don't have enough time, but I have to rely on that pastor to have enough time to analyze the text for me. But how do I meta-analyze whether or not the pastor is qualified to do that in the first place? Without any system, which you still have not provided, I have no hope in doing that.
So they call themselves Christian, but they have no idea what the Bible is about. And I'm not saying that I know what the Bible is about, because I'm searching too. I'm still looking and I'm still trying to understand it.
I agree. Very few Christians know what the Bible says in general. And atheists have been shown through polls and studies to typically know more about the Bible than any given Christian does. And so that's a problem. That's a huge issue. And one can only speculate on why that is. I have my own thoughts about it, but it's mere speculation. A question I would ask you is, instead of just looking at the text as it's written today, what research have you done about where the text came from in the first place? Where was the manuscript found, and when, and who wrote it? Who found it, and where was it found? How was the different writing gathered together, and what system was used to decide what would become canon and what would be rejected as not being canon, and why? And who decided that, and where were they located? And if possible, find out names and places and dates. What archaeological evidence is there to support these locations mentioned in the Bible? What about the people in the Bible? Is there any evidence about those people? What evidence is there for any of the stories in the Bible at all? And to look into the history of all of that. Have you done any of that? And if not, well, why are you simply just reading it and assuming like it's based on any fact at all when it could just be made up whole cloth?
Not only the Bible. I mean, like I said in somewhere else, I'm more partial to Buddhism, so I frequently look at Buddhist sutras and try to understand them. And
Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what mortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? What does this poem mean? What does it mean? Who decides? Based on what? What system are we going to utilize to decide what that group of words meant? Here's a photo that a friend of mine drew for me that I really enjoy. Well, what does that mean? It's Misty from Pokemon, and she's holding a Togepi, and she's holding an egg, and there's two of her, so she's been cloned. So this is a universe where two of her exist, and she doesn't quite look like the anime Misty, but she kinda does, and there's Pokeballs, and there's 4 of them, and actually there's 5, because the clone is holding one. Well, which one's the original, and which one's the clone, and how deep does this rabbit hole go? Or maybe it's just a drawing that somebody drew because I asked them to, and I enjoy it, and that's the end of that. Maybe we should view all works of religion as art. That it's subjective, that yes, you can derive something from it, but whatever you pull from it is going to be wholly subjective. And if you want to suggest that it's more than that it's true, then you're going to have to provide the system to determine that it is in fact true. Because we have science that can do that with the actual world. So what system would we use to say, well, a painting X is beautiful? Well, that's subjective. Is there a way to quantify that in a non-subjective way? Maybe there is. Maybe there's a science to what paintings we humans will tend to find beautiful over other ones. But then that will be based on, society and brain patterns and some other stuff. And maybe ultimately we'll figure out why people believe in gods. And we'll sort it all out. And in that process, at no point does there need to be an enlightened Buddha, or a Buddha at all. Just somebody wrote down something that they thought was interesting. And somebody else thought that it was really profound, even if it wasn't. William Blake's poetry is enjoyable to me, but I don't elevate it higher than I do Shakespeare. But I do enjoy Shakespeare. Both can be analyzed and read and enjoyed at different levels, and both can be analyzed at different levels, and I suppose one could base their entire life around doing that. But why elevate things to a divine or holy status? What system are we going to use to determine that something is in fact holy or divine? And yes, you can get great enjoyment and pleasure from all sorts of art, including religion, which I view as art. But is it real? And real in the sense that everything else is real, not just real in that, yes, it really made me feel good. Okay, yeah, I agree. But is it really real? Does it exist out here with the rest of us? Because if God is just art, then it's completely subjective and it only exists in the mind. And then the atheist position should be clear. We see it for what it is. It's just art. It's interesting, perhaps, but it's not any realness to it. But there is a difference between art and God. You can see art. You can read art. You can't see or read God. But you can read things about God and see things that people have said are God. But whatever God is not a thing that has yet been demonstrated to be a thing other than a subjective thing. And so the skeptic / atheist tends to want evidence that it's a thing in the first place, and not some metaphorical thing, but an actual thing. And if it isn't a thing, then we should just admit that it's not a thing. Now, Miki, and I'm hoping to pronounce that name correctly because I can't pronounce words right. This has been a long video. So I think I'll end it here. If you want me to do a part 2, anybody wants me to do a part 2, let me know in the comments below. And based on, how excited they seem, I might do a part 2 and do the rest of this video. Hopefully Miki will get around to responding to some or all of the points that I've said. And they said that they don't have a lot of time or whatever, so maybe they want to take just one chunk of what I've said and respond to that with one video, and do a different video at a different time where they respond to a different chunk of what I've said. That's fine, that's great. Whatever they want to do, however they want to do it, whatever interaction we have, hopefully it will be one where they can understand where I'm coming from, because I think I do understand where they're coming from, because I did believe in God at one point. I believed that it was a real thing. Now I don't. Now I believe it is entirely a thing that we want to be real. Maybe some of us need to be real, but it's just a product of our imagination. And it's okay to admit that. And it's still enjoyable. It's art. You can make anything of it that you want. But at least with art, we can actually see it, or hear it, or taste it, or smell it, or touch it, because we have empirical evidence of it. And we don't have that with God. And with art, we could test it. We could find out why humans like one thing over a different thing, and we could do repeatable tests on different various versions of songs, and what musical notes make minds react in what way and why. But we can't do any test upon God. And finally, we could provide some sort of critical analysis, or even a logically valid argument for if something is correct or incorrect given a particular piece of artwork. We could say, well, this is objectively valid, and here's the argument to support that it's objectively valid. And that argument would need to be valid and sound for us to think that the conclusion was true. And if it wasn't, we would have to be skeptical of the conclusion. So, if we don't have empirical evidence, we don't have repeatable tests, and we don't have a valid and sound conclusion, we should be skeptical of the conclusions.